Babies are blessings, but are you a blessing to that baby? If you do not heal from the trauma of your childhood, you end up traumatizing your children. And maybe you never went without a meal, but you also never looked out in the crowd at any of your school activities and saw your parent. Welcome back to Toppy Talks. Today's video is going to be on FCS parenting, which is something, I'm sure it's not a new concept, but it's something that I've kind of used to think or analyze what my childhood was like. And I feel like I experienced FCS parenting, which is food, clothes, shelter parenting. My upbringing was centered around the essentials of food, clothes, and shelter, but I didn't receive a whole lot of emotional support, encouragement, healthy coping mechanisms, love, support, guidance. It was just like, I'm keeping a roof over your head, I'm giving you clothes, and you have food to eat. And sometimes I feel that people who experience FCS parenting, I'm curious to know if other people have felt minimized in their experience because there wasn't physical assault or schmexual assault. I wonder if people have felt like, oh, well, my childhood wasn't that bad, so I shouldn't complain. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about what that felt like and some of the things that I've learned, and kind of just looking back on my childhood and experiencing FCS parenting. I feel that FCS parenting can be harmful to a child because while there isn't, like I said, those other things present, like schmexual or physical abuse or assault, the child is still in a very unstable environment when it comes to emotions. And that can build adultification in a child. It can make a child hyper dependent, or in some cases codependent. So it's just like one extreme or the other when it comes to emotions and emotional regulation or the lack thereof. And that can be hard when you're trying to form healthy and safe friendships and romantic relationships when you grow older. And so I kind of just want to get into attachment styles a little bit to then see how FCS parenting kind of directly goes against that. So and I have my computer and my notes in front of me. So there are 4 main attachment styles: secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. And I will be using an article from healthclevelandclinic.org for today's video. So secure attachment is defined as the result of a caregiver consistently responding to their baby's needs. The baby learns that the world is safe and people can be trusted. So the idea that, okay, when I cry out, someone responds in a loving and caring manner that I feel safe to express my emotions, and I know that I'm cared for and that my caregiver is going to return. Anxious attachment can happen when a baby's primary caregiver is inconsistent in meeting their needs. The baby learns that they may or may not get what they need, so they aren't easily comforted. So the idea that the parent is sometimey and their behavior is inconsistent, so the baby does not understand which version they're going to get. So it makes it harder for the baby to feel safe or trust, which in my opinion, this isn't the article, I feel that I kind of developed anxious attachment, and that resulted in either one extreme or the other in some cases, definitely in my friendships. I was very codependent on my friends growing up. I feel like I had a codependency best friendship for every stage of my life, and I didn't really break that pattern until my my early 20s going into my mid 20s was when I finally realized, like, hey, if I want healthy friendships, I can't be so codependent on my friends. Granted, I also say my anxious attachment definitely fed into being male-centered in my teenage and early 20s as well. Avoidant attachment is most likely formed when a caregiver doesn't provide a baby with enough emotional support. Their caregiver's responsiveness mostly ends with caring for the baby's physical needs like feeding and bathing. Sound familiar? Food, clothes, and shelter. So avoidant attachment, you gonna feed and bathe that baby, but when it comes to letting them know that it's okay to cry when they fall down, helping them take deep breaths and explain and use their words, that caregiver isn't providing that, and so the child may shy away from emotional things, or they may just shut down because they weren't given the space to really explore that. Disorganized attachment often forms through a particularly tumultuous childhood, often one marked by fear or trauma. And then the interesting thing is the article also gets into what ages that the attachment styles can be determined. So it says pre-attachment is birth to 6 weeks, where the infant doesn't really have a preference for a particular person. Attachment in the making or development is 6 weeks to 7 months. The baby starts to recognize and prefer familiar people, but will accept care from others. Clear-cut attachment is 7 months to 24 months, so 7 months to 2 years old. Baby forms a stronger attachment for a primary caregiver and prefers them to all others. This is often the high point of separation anxiety. And then it says reciprocal relationship, 2 years old and above. Toddlers begin to understand that caregivers have needs and feelings too, and that their absence is temporary. They also begin to form relationships with other people. So within the first 2 years of a person's life, so much of their attachment style is formed, and then it just kind of carries on throughout their life. And so I feel very strongly that people should really take their time and enter into parenthood with intention, when obviously it's in a consensual, when the pregnancy is formed from a consensual sexual relationship. Because obviously in some cases, when people have their consent taken away from them, births and pregnancies are a result of that. And I'm not speaking about those situations. I just think that there needs to be an intentionality, because, and you know, it's kind of interesting because I never thought about it, but in a capitalist society, I could see how a lot of parents fall into this FCS category, because they're constantly thinking about the needs of their child from a monetary standpoint of, okay, I have to find a job that supports me enough to have this 2-bedroom apartment, or I need a job that covers my mortgage and that also gives me health insurance for me and my dependents. And okay, I know my kids have to eat. I could see how being in a working class or lower class household, a parent could become so immersed in providing the food, clothes, and shelter that they kind of lose sight about the emotional support, the love, the guidance, creating a safe space for your child to ask questions, because this is their first time on earth. They have as much knowledge as they have at that exact moment. And so they need a safe space to be able to ask questions because they don't have the lived experiences to already know the answer. I also think that FCS parenting could come up in a, upper middle class or even rich family, because you might feel a parent could potentially feel like they're providing for all of their kids' needs because they have an excess of food and an excess of clothes and designer, and their house is huge and they have a movie theater and a pool in the backyard, so they might feel like my child has the perfect life, when really that child just wants to bond with them, or that child just wants to know that their parent cares for them. And both are kind of anchored in one way or the other. Both situations are anchored and kind of rooted in capitalism and not taking the time to really think about the emotional and mental development of a child and what they need. So I'm just taking a look at my notes. The saying babies are blessings is so common from a pro-life stance. Like, oh, babies are blessings from God. People shouldn't have abortions because babies are blessings. And I would encourage people to really take a step back and determine, are you going to be a blessing to your baby? Babies are blessings, but are you a blessing to that baby? And what does that look like? That literally looks like taking a step back, zooming out, and taking accountability and emotional inventory of, how am I when I'm upset? When I'm overstimulated, what are my reactions? Can I handle a toddler asking me the same question 10 times because that's what it takes for their brain to understand? I feel like people have to really think about the type of person they are under stress, when they are tired, when they are hungry, when they're sick, because you don't stop being a parent when all of those things happen. And so I feel that we really, as a society, need to take more consideration when it comes to entering parenthood. And of course, I'm speaking from the lens of a 27-year-old woman who doesn't have children. And I feel that one of the main reasons I don't have kids is because I've always been hyper aware of what it takes. And I've questioned up until this point, is it even something I desire? Do I desire to stretch myself to the point of being exhausted and sleep deprived in order to care for an infant in those first, in that first year? Do I like the person that I am when I can't freely take a nap outside of my working hours? Obviously I'm an adult with a job, so I have to be up for those hours that I'm at work and for my commute and my commute home. But after that, do I see myself wanting to work a full 8-hour shift with, maybe 1.5 hours commute combined, to then come home and show up intentionally for my children and engage with them and ask them how their day is and cook a healthy and nutritious meal for them and navigate and walk alongside them? I've thought about this deeply, and I don't know if I desire to stretch myself in that way, which is why I don't have children right now, because I don't want to continue the cycle of being a food, clothes, and shelter parent. And I want more people to take the time to think about that, to just think. And I really hope that If you in the comments experienced FCS parenting, if you're comfortable sharing, like, how did that affect you? Do you currently have children? How have you tried to break that cycle? Do you currently have children and realize you may be continuing that? What are some paths forward? If you didn't experience that growing up and you feel like you had a very supportive familial system, I would love to hear everyone's perspective, regardless of if it matches or doesn't match what I'm discussing today. I also think with FCS parenting, there's the sentiment of, well, I did my best. And your best caused harm. Plain and simple. You did your best with the knowledge that you could at that time, but your best caused harm, and it's important to understand that a child needs more than food, clothes, and shelter. And that's not to take away from the fact that without those three things, that child's life would have looked vastly different, and they would have encountered even more adversity and hurdles that they would have had to navigate. I don't take lightly the sacrifice that it took for my mom and my stepmom to keep a roof over our heads and to keep food in the house and to, provide us with clothes. I also understand that a lot of times parents, and specifically my situation, my parents were working class, but they were paycheck to paycheck. So there wasn't a whole lot of extra after the bills were paid, after the food, clothes, and shelter were taken care of. So I got a job at, I remember going to my school counselor and trying to get a worker's permit, because if you were under the age of 15. So I want to say I started looking for jobs at 14, but I think I got my first job when I was 15, because it was the summer after my freshman year of high school. And that was not uncommon. I don't think that's an uncommon thing to work as a teenager, but I do think that depending on your parents' financial situation, what your money goes to and the freedom that you have with working as a teenager definitely changes. And in my situation, I was 15 and I was paying for my phone bill, for my doctor's copay visits. I had insurance through my mom, but I had to pay for, and like the eye insurance, because I have glasses. I've been wearing glasses since I was in fifth grade, maybe later, or sooner. I was also paying for either one or the other, because my insurance through my mom covered glasses or contacts. So I was paying for whichever one I didn't get through my insurance, as well as my cheerleading fees. And sports is very expensive. So I want to say, with like all in, I think my cheerleading fees were $2,000 to $3,000 a year, which is a lot of money for a 15-year-old only working part-time, on top of all the other things that I was paying for, like my, that I mentioned, in addition to, like, at that point I was buying my own clothes and toiletries and stuff like that. So that really adds up from a part-time perspective. When I first started my job, I was making $8 an hour. So that put a lot of pressure on me. I know it took a lot of pressure off my parents, because they were already doing the best they could to keep a roof and food over our heads, but it transferred that pressure to me. And I'm gonna make another video about the adultification of children, specifically from the lens of when you do have to start working and taking care of financial pressures at such a young age, and what that does to your relationship with money, the amount of stress that introduced, and also the adultification from the lens of when you have a big family and you then become the pseudo parent because your parent is working. Or should I just put that in this video? It just kind of tie in. I think I'll just talk about it in this video. So I think, to add on, when you have a food, clothes, and shelter parent system that also has a ton of kids, when you're thinking about, a family that might have 4 or more children, the older siblings then become adults way before their time. They end up having to become the in-house nanny, the babysitter, the enforcer of rules, and what that does to their mental health, and it kind of robs them of their childhood. And I feel like this occurrence maybe would be primarily for the working class FCS parents or the lower income FCS parents, because if you are like upper middle class or wealthy, if you had a bunch of kids, you probably may have the money to have like an in-house nanny or babysitter on payroll, or just like more support so those kids aren't forced into that adult standpoint. And the goal of this video isn't to necessarily bash someone a parent who finds themselves in the predicament of working multiple jobs to make ends meet, because we are in a capitalist society. Things and the cost of living are super expensive, and trying to navigate and keep those 3 factors intact, especially if you're a single parent with kids, that can be climbing Mount Everest in itself. And so you literally may not have the energy or bandwidth to expand to do other things like the guidance, the love, and the creating a safe space for questions. But I do think it's a conversation worth having. And I will say, I would be curious to know if any one of you in the comments feels like the FCS parenting that you experienced was a cycle because your grandparents were FCS parents, so your parents never got that love, support, guidance, that safe space to ask questions, and so they raised you in the way that they knew how instead of in the way that they would have wanted. Because I do wonder, like, if you've never seen it, if you've never experienced it, how do you then create it? And this gets into the idea that if you do not heal from the trauma of your childhood, you end up traumatizing your children. That also makes it important to really do some self-discovery, some healing, and some therapy before, if possible, before having children. So yeah, those are my main thoughts. And I just do think it's important to talk about emotional neglect and the idea of not, a child not being supported from an energetic standpoint, and what that does to a child and their development. And, maybe you never went without a meal, but you also never looked out in the crowd at any of your school activities and saw your parent or saw a family member there to support you. And maybe you were never hit or punched or slapped, but you also can probably count on your hand the amount of hugs that you got, or the amount of times where your parent just said, "I'm proud of you." And I feel like there needs to be a space to kind of have that conversation, So yeah, thanks for tuning into Tavi Talks. Let me know what you think in the comments. And I'll also put the link to this article, the Health Cleveland Clinic article, in the description. Have a good rest of your day or a good rest of your night. And I hope that you subscribe, turn on the notification bell for more videos on Tavi Talks.